I was just saying, it's been a while since I've been in front of a crowd. But thanks for coming. I'm going to show a lot of pictures. I'm going to, together, we're going to share the evolution of technology from about 1880s until today. And there are some interesting boat stories that I'd like to share as well. And to some degree, if you have any questions or comments, say what you need to say. Maybe I'll keep going. Maybe I'll listen. Does everybody know where this picture is? Oswego. And any guesses on how long ago this picture was taken? I took this picture when I was with Mike.
5 years. More than that.
It was 2014. I can't do the math so quickly, so that would be 8 years ago. But I like this picture because at this single moment, there are 3 tugboats in Oswego Harbor. And the nearest one is here today. Everybody know what boat that is? Margot. And then the next one is no longer that color. Any guesses? It's Cheyenne. And Cheyenne right now is working out of Manitowoc, Wisconsin. And the one that you can hardly see was originally a Moran boat. Now it goes by the name of Will Seymour. It's a Canadian boat. It runs out of Hamilton. But way back in I've got all my notes here, but way back in 1961, it was built in Texas for Moran. It was the M. Moran. It's huge. It's 122 feet by 31 beam. And it still works, pushing aluminum out of the aluminum smelters in up along the St. Lawrence River to places like Oswego where they do stamping of automobile parts. The connection between all but about 3 or 4 of the boats, or the common thread among the boats that I'm going to talk about today, all except for 3 or 4, is that they all at some point were on the Great Lakes, and at some point they were on salt water, and they used the Erie Canal in order to get between them. Title is Boomland. Anybody know what year peak cargo was transported on the barge canal? 51. And in 1951, there was 5 million tons of cargo transported on the Erie Canal. I put an asterisk next to on, because there are a couple of boats that I'm going to show you that were built less than a mile from here, but in no way could ever travel on the Erie Canal. Any guesses why? Size. The photos that I really had the pleasure of working with come from the Canal Society. Canal Society is an organization. You can Google them. They have a lot of archives. A lot of these photos haven't been seen in a really long time. So Craig Williams gave me permission to use these, and another friend of mine, William Lafferty, he knows everything. So he knows how to research a lot better than I do. If you want to increase your knowledge of the Erie Canal, here are some books to read. All but one of these was written by somebody who has intimate connection working on the canal or working with boats. The author of the last one, Tugboats and Shipyards, The Russells of New York Harbor, and then there's a longer date, there's a longer subtitle than that. There's some dates. The author is here. Hillary, could you raise your hand? He has some copies of Tugboats and Shipyards available if you wish to purchase them today. Just a note on that, there is a Russell boat on the bulkhead here. Does anybody know which one? Decker. Decker was originally called Russell 1. Problem for researching is that there have been several Russell 1s and several Russell 2s. There was a steam version of Russell 3 and a diesel version of Russell 3. It makes it really confusing when you're trying to trace the history of some of these boats. Okay, first thing we're going to do is walk back a couple years until way before everybody here was born. Was anybody at the 2014 roundup? Yeah, I was. Anybody recognize the boat in the foreground here? Yeah, Mike, you can't answer all the questions.
I'm not going to answer anymore. That's it.
Okay, so some of these boats are no longer on the water or in danger of being no longer on the water. For example, Buffalo is the first one. It's in Buffalo now, but I don't know what the status is, and you can ask me later what happened to the other ones. What do these two boats have in common, other than being built almost 100 years apart? Okay, so one of the issues on the barge canal, the Erie Canal, was low bridges, shallow draft, and so on. Dave Peckinpah was the last cargo ship on the canal. It's less than half a mile from here. Grand Caribe was a passenger vessel that no longer works on the canal because COVID wiped that out. I know because I used to be the lecturer on the Blount boats, and COVID happened, and then after COVID happened, the company decided they really did not want to be in the passenger business anymore. So the boats are for sale, and people who used to see the barge canal from that boat on a 3-day trip between here and Oswego, or between Oswego and here, no longer have that opportunity. And I can talk with you about that operation if you're interested. So we're moving back. This is the first time I saw this is before I worked for Blount, and I had no idea how that boat was going to fit into the lock. There's Decker. And beyond Decker, it's Cheyenne, Chancellor, and then Margot. I don't have any photos during that time period because I came to the roundup for the first time in 2006. So if anybody has any photos to share, I'll probably do this presentation again sometime. Get in touch. Some people identify this photo as being from 59, others from 49. The problem is that over on the bulkhead there's a Buick. It looks like about a 1949 Buick Special, so that doesn't help at all. I mean, it could be a brand new car, or it could be a 10-year-old car at this point. Common thread in these photos is the 2nd Street Bridge. The boat nearest the bulkhead there in 1950 was called the Poughkeepsie Saucony. It left the canal at a certain point and became Captain Sam, and then later it became Kristen Poling. Continued working in New York Harbor and the Hudson River and the Sound until 2011 when it was scrapped. You know the boat pushing all the steam? Urger was dieselized in 1948. Amsterdam Saucony eventually became Poling number 8, I think it is, and was scrapped in 2001, I believe, but continued to work from 1924. It was brand new here until 2001. It was a very different place in 2017. I'm sorry, in 1917. See the date on this? May 29, 1909. So I'm guessing that construction was underway, but the lock number 2 that you see over here was not yet open for sure. And here's another view of the same time period. So at that time, the canal boats would go up the existing waterway there. But the bridge was there. So we've gone back as far as we can go. The rest of the photos were taken after the barge canal was open, so after 1918. The color pictures were taken by a gentleman named Albert Geyer, who lived in Schenectady, and documented the canal really heavily during the 1950s and 60s. The black and white pictures were taken right after the canal opened, but after 1920, and a lot of them had dates on them. Anybody identify where this picture is? Lions. It's Lions, and the giveaway is 27. Okay, so Elise and Connors. Connors was the big tugboat company in the 40s and 50s. They had all diesel boats. But Elise and Connors was built in 1881. And it was initially, obviously, built as a steamboat, and it transported coal between Cumberland, Maryland, and Washington, D.C., where the coal got onto the Potomac River. Anybody know where Elise and Connors is today?
Is it in Kingston, New York?
It's still in Kingston. It's for sale. It has an Atlas Imperial engine in it, just like Urger.
Was it raised off the bottom of Roundup Creek?
It spent 6 months at the bottom of Roundup Creek. And the private owners have decided that it really is too much of a project for them to continue. Oh, really? Okay. Did everybody hear John's comment? So in 2002, Elise and Connors was at the Roundup here. Again, it's for sale. It's in Rondout, in the Rondout in Kingston. So I also put the dimensions of these boats so you can compare as we go along. This photo was taken in 1921. Anybody know where this is? The clue is that stone building just beyond or between the tow and the tugboat. It's in Lockport. Photo was taken in 1921. The boat belonged to a gentleman named Benjamin L. Cowles, and his name is going to come up again and again. He was from Buffalo, and I'll tell you more about him in a little bit. Clearly, that's a steam vessel. Here's where it was built by George Notter. If I'm not mistaken, that part of the canal has been filled in, and there are lots of buildings on both sides of where that waterway once was. Back to this picture. So this photo was taken in 1924, but we're going to look at the tugboat. Tugboat was built in 1883. It operated for a company called W.E. Hedger Transportation Company, and it worked on the canal as a steamboat until 1954. Now, I was born in 1954. I wish I had been paying attention to the canal at that time. When I look at that boat, I am positive, I can't prove it, I'm positive that that boat was modified to fit through the canal system. Because you look at the wheelhouse, it looks totally out of sync with the rest of the design. So when that boat was moved from saltwater or the Hudson River to work on the canal, they needed to lower the wheelhouse. You can't see it, but this photo was taken in 1921. Crescent was built in Lake Michigan. And it first operated as a fish tug. Now, raise your hand if you've never heard the term fish tug before. Okay, so in the late 19th century, fishing was done with sailing vessels. However, when steam engines became available, somebody said, you know, a steamboat is going to be able to pull a fish net or retrieve a fish net or get out to the fishing ground much faster than a sailing vessel will. So they started putting steam engines in fishing boats. They called them fish tugs because they tugged nets. But this gentleman that I mentioned before, Benjamin L. Cowles, he saw an opportunity when the barge canal opened. He decided, hey, suddenly we have this bigger canal. There's going to be a lot of cargo on it. I'm going to buy up fish tugs and transform them into tugboats for the Erie Canal. So, Mr. Powell's whole business plan was buying fish tugs off of the Great Lakes and redesigning them so that they could tow barges. Has anybody not seen a fish tug? Okay, there's one on the Hard in Oswego, and if you go up to places like Bayfield, Wisconsin, there are dozens of fish tugs that go out every year and fish. Commercial fishing on the Great Lakes. Here's an example of a fish tug. They have all this enclosure on it to protect the fishermen so that they can be out fishing in November when it's snowing and cleaning fish when it's, you know, nasty out. Down on the Roundout, there's a company called Feeney Shipyard. Way before Feeney Shipyard, there was a Feeney Transportation Company, and they worked a lot on the canal. I want you to look at the wheelhouse of this boat. Atop the wheelhouse, there are some green plates. So those are there so that when the captain needed to see over the barge, he'd fold these things up, and he had a platform that he could stand on. And there was one problem. Can you imagine what the problem would be with these folding weather? Yeah. So here's another picture of Feeney. I'm not going to repeat the information about the date. This is how Feeney looked when it worked on the canal. But it was built in Philadelphia by a company called Neefe and Levy. And if you're familiar with the Maritime Museum in Philadelphia, there's a tugboat there called Jupiter. Jupiter was built by Neefe and Levy also. They are related. I've forgotten exactly how they are related. This is how that boat looked when it was first operating as a Standard Oil tug. So what did they do? They chopped off the wheelhouse, and because with a wheelhouse of that height, they wouldn't be able to make it under the bridges in the canal. Okay, this boat, Queen, was built. Now, I've mentioned this name enough times. What was the gentleman in Buffalo who would buy fish tugs and convert them into tugboats? Mr. Cowles. Okay. This was not one of the fish tugs, but he built it in 1897, and he sold it to George Bolt. Anybody know the name George Bolt or Bolt Castle? Okay. So if you look at the picture, ice in the foreground, there's an island in the background, some construction on it. That was Bolt Castle. So built in Buffalo, was sold to Mr. Bolt, worked on the St. Lawrence. Mr. Bolt and his workers used it to transport blocks of granite from his quarry. Then Mr. Cowles decided to run it on the barge canal and ran it until 1944. So this photo was taken in 22. Ran it on the barge canal until 1944, and then he sold it to parties on the Delaware River. It was working on the Delaware River until 1977, and it was visible as a wreck on the side of the Delaware River until 1991. Somebody was going to get me a picture of the wreck, but I never got it. Which lock is this? 17. Now, I don't know very much about this boat. The name is George Latimer. There are the dimensions. But other than a truly fantastic image of a steamboat leaving Lock 17, I can't say much about it. Okay, this is Lock 17 as well. Any guesses what year this photo was taken? 2014. It's black and white because I was trying to make a connection between these two boats. But Urger at one time was referred to as the ambassador of the canal system. Here are the dimensions. This photo was taken probably in the 1950s. It worked on the barge canal from 1922 until 1987. It was dieselized in 1948. So there was an earlier picture of Urger that I showed, and it was all steam. So obviously this photo was taken after 1948. Yeah? Oh yeah, there's a spotlight on the starboard side. Yeah. Urger began life as a fish tug. It was called H.J. Dornbus. It was built on the west side of the state of Michigan, so on Lake Michigan. And again, there's all that enclosure so that the fishermen would be protected while they were fishing in winter. Same boat, but actually not the same boat at all. This is Urger today. Urger is mothballed, currently on the Hard in a place called Lysander, New York. Lysander is up on the Oswego River. And nobody knows its fate. So in May, there was a study trip of the Canal Society, and one of the stops along the way on this Canal Society trip, we went to see Urger and Seneca. Actually, we have at least two former captains of Urger, Jack and Steve.
My father was skipper here from 1991 to 1996.
Okay, and Mike was longtime deckhand. I was one season deckhand. Yeah. So, oh, there's Steve. Okay. Taken in the 50s, look at the string of barges. I could reposition that a little bit, but there are 5 barges being towed on that string. This particular boat, Hugh O'Donnell, was built on Delaware Bay, and built by a company that specialized in building yachts for people in Philadelphia and along the Chesapeake. Built in 1919, but it was converted to diesel already in 1925. The tug was broken up in 1962. So the date is cut off there, June 13, 1921. what looks like a barge there is the first cargo ship that was built specifically to transport cargo on the Erie Canal. And the dimensions, you see, the dimensions are pretty much equivalent to the usable space inside a lock, 254 by 36. The reason it's being towed, it was built in Duluth, traveled from Duluth to Buffalo, loaded a cargo, I believe, of oats. It's written here someplace. And as they started to make their way from west to east on the canal, they had problems with the diesel engines on it. And so as a way of making sure they got with that cargo to New York City, Tugboat Lorraine, see the name on the wheelhouse, Cowles again. Cowles accompanied it, I believe, all the way to New York City. I know that Lorraine accompanied 101 as far as Buffalo. Lorraine was built in Ashtabula, Ohio. It was built as a fish tug, had a one-cylinder steam engine. And I told you before that Mr. Cowles, his specialty was buying fish tugs and converting them to tugboats for moving cargo. When 101 was built, and it was initially called 101, it was one of 5, 101 through 105. And over the course of the history of these boats, and it's a fascinating history, and I don't have time to talk about it all today, the names changed. Michigan had initially been 105. And you notice a difference in the wheelhouse on 101 and 105. For one thing, it's set farther back. It's more substantial. In the winter of 1940-41, 105, or it was called Michigan already at that time, was crossing Lake Erie into a nasty storm, and the wheelhouse got pretty wet. So they decided they were going to redesign the boat and move the wheelhouse farther midships. Anybody have any idea where Michigan is today? This is Michigan today. I took that picture about a year ago. It's on the Arthur Kill. It's been on the Arthur Kill since about 1965. This is an area called Don John Recycling. It's just beyond where these wrecks are. And the engines were removed, so if I were to show you the stern of the boat, the stern has been cut off. I guess that happened in 1996. So we're in the 20s. Notice the wheelhouse on Hustler. So evidently this would pop up and down as needed. This is a step up from the folding planks that were there on an earlier slide that I showed you. Hustler was built in Philadelphia, worked for OTCO, which is Oil Transportation Company, until Moran bought it. And in 1965, Hustler, still operating under the name Hustler, was doing ship assist on the Hudson River off the West Piers in Manhattan. And it got T-boned by a ship. Got in front of a ship, capsized. No one was killed. I don't know about being injured, but that was the end of the boat. So from 1923 until this unfortunate accident in Manhattan in 1965, Hustler was working in the area. There's a boat here that was originally called Hustler 2. Anybody know which boat that would be? It's right on the bulkhead today. Margot originally was built as Hustler 2. This is a Cargill boat. Cargill's the big grain buyer, multinational now. Unusual thing about Protector was that it was built in Essex, Massachusetts. What do you associate with shipbuilding in Essex, Massachusetts? Schooners. In fact, it was built at the Story Yard. And the Story Yard is known for building like more than 400 schooners. One of the schooners being the Lady G. Howard, built by the Story Yard. Cargill used this boat until 1940. I'm not sure, but I believe this is the waterfront in Waterford. Maybe somebody can confirm that or not. Oh, is that what that is? Yeah. Okay. So, so the comment was the building opposite Russell 3 used to be where they built fire engines in Waterford. And the company name was Button. Yeah, that's right. Right. Now, think about the tugboats that you've seen on the bulkhead, and look at that wheelhouse. Now, I believe it's designed to be able to elevate or lower. I have no idea what the mechanism. Was it a mechanical jack? I really don't know. But that definitely seems to be propped up so that it can be lowered to go under a low bridge. Built 12 years after 101, this is quite interesting ship. It was a dry bulk carrier, just like 101 or Day Peckinpah, if you want to call it that. Built at Mariners Harbor in Staten Island. And during the 1933 season, it made 7 trips between New York City and Detroit, transporting denatured alcohol. I'm not sure what that is. What happens to the canal in wintertime? Shuts because of ice. So during that particular winter, it traveled down to the Chesapeake, and it was transporting tobacco between different points on the Chesapeake. It continued that kind of season until 1942. What was happening in 1942? Yeah, so the War Shipping Administration took it over, and they wanted to use it to transport bauxite. And I'm not sure what where it would pick up the bauxite, but it traveled from Jersey City, where it was refitted to haul bauxite, through the Panama Canal to San Francisco. During the war, it made its way to the Philippines, and it worked in the Philippines until 1954, when it was cut down to be made into a lighter. So the engines were taken out and so on. I'm not sure where this picture was taken. I sometimes think it's Oswego, sometimes I think it's Troy. Maybe somebody has a better idea. I tried not to include many Canal Corp boats, but Syracuse is one of my favorites. It was built in Syracuse. It still operates, but here's an issue. You have to have a licensed captain in order to operate. Of course you need a licensed captain to operate a boat, except, and I'll get to the except in a little bit. This boat was a regular at the Roundup for many years. I took this photo probably in 14, built in Brooklyn at the Bushy Yard. It's like many of the boats, it's a bell boat. And I mention a bell boat because a bell boat requires the captain to ring bells to tell the engineer what to do. And we'll get away from a bell boat in a little bit. But Chancellor right now is like Elise Ann Connors on the endangered list. Yes?
Are all those steamboats, the Cheyenne, the Chancellor, the Joplin, are they the same boats?
They're very similar designs. Is that what you mean? The question was Chancellor, Cheyenne, Margot, are they the same boat? They're the same design. They all have wheelhouses that can raise and lower. Yeah, and I'm beyond my pay grade here, if the hulls are the same or not. Seneca has an interesting history also. It was a big boat, for one thing, to be on the canal, 94 feet long by 26. It worked on the canal until 1984, when it was sold to parties on the West Coast in Seattle. And the Seattle group quickly sold it to Mexico, to Ensenada. And folks in Ensenada were going to convert it into a fishing trawler. But when you try to convert one thing into another thing, it's often pretty complicated. So evidently it was cut up in Ensenada after not really making it as a fishing trawler. This is a self-propelled barge, another Cargill project. And you can see where the stern is by where the exhausts are. There's a little wheelhouse that can pop up and down. It's actually 4 units cabled together. It was built on the Ohio River near Pittsburgh, taken down to Ohio, up the Illinois. They loaded it with cargo near Chicago. They overloaded it with cargo near Chicago. It sank off of Wilmette. It was raised. Evidently, I've read that the cargo was good. So they continued with this boat through the canal. Cargo at that time had a very large warehouse in Albany. Here's a slightly different picture. You can see that it's actually 4 sections cabled together. I don't know how many crew there were. The dimensions are below there. But the crew who worked on it said that the accommodations were pretty nice. This boat was built in Beaumont, Texas, to be the Thomas E. Moran. But there were things happening in 1941, so the Navy requisitioned it and used it until 1944. Moran purchased it back and renamed it as Mary Moran. It was diesel electric. So we're now way out of the steam engine period. It was diesel electric. Its regular run was towing oil barges between Bayonne and Tonawanda and Toronto. But it would start its runs in Bayonne. Here's a picture of Mary Moran at a lock. I'm not sure. It could be 14. I'm not sure which lock this is. Okay. Okay. I'm jumping back a little bit because less than a half mile from here is Matin Shipyard. Matin Shipyard built lots of boats beginning in 1922 up on the Champlain portion of the canal here. They built wooden barges. Then the company was transferred from father to son. Son wanted to build steel vessels. This was the shipyard. You can walk over this bridge and down about a half a mile or less, and you can see the remnants of Matin Shipyard. The reason I put this picture here, Matin Shipyard built Tigre in 1941. Now Tigre and some of boats that follow were built very near this location, but could not travel on the barge canal because of size issues. Now, with a name like Tigre, do you have any idea who Matten built this for? The Peruvian government. And so when you're thinking Peru, you're probably thinking Panama Canal. No. Up the Amazon to that little bit of, you travel through a lot of Brazil, and eventually you keep going on the Amazon and you get to Peru. You can't get over the Andes, but you can get to that part of Peru. Matten built 2 of these boats for the Peruvian government, and supposedly Tigre is still there, now named Franco. And if anybody wants to pay for my trip to Peru, I'll go check it out and bring back pictures for next year. Russell 9. I think this picture is taken in Waterford also, but I can't really prove that. Russell 9 went through a lot of transformations and eventually showed up in New York City as Coastline Girls, and then Coastline Girls turned into Gage Paul Thornton, and back about 5 years ago, Gage Paul was sold to interests in Africa, and it actually has a sad ending because as this boat was being delivered from New York City to Africa, there was a storm, and it was lost with all hands. You know this boat? Margot, it's down there on the wall. You can probably tour Margot. You know what Margot does in wintertime? Breaks ice between Schenectady and Lock 7 because the ice jams above that dam were leading to flooding. And at this time, I think I took this picture in 2015, it was transporting Canadian corn to an ethanol plant on the Oswego River for ethanol. Cheyenne, again, I can't say if the hull is very similar, but Cheyenne used to be a regular at the Tugboat Roundup. It's currently working out of Manitowoc, Wisconsin. There was a great picture on Facebook about 2 weeks ago. There's a ferry that goes between Manitowoc and Ludington, Michigan, and there was a strong wind out of the east that was preventing this ferry called Badger from getting away from the dock. And so there was Cheyenne on the bow moving Badger off the dock. Cheyenne has a wheelhouse that can be raised or lowered. So at this point, Cheyenne was just coming through Lock 8 in Oswego, and the wheelhouse was down. This is an interesting boat. If you look on the stack, which company operates it? Moran. This was Moran's experiment with push tugs on the barge canal. Came out in 1967. You notice it's a pretty small boat. It was designed to move 2 20,000 barrel oil barges, and they put 6 berths in the boat, but when they staffed it, they only hired 5 people because they had a new invention on board. The invention was a microwave oven. And the microwave oven and a big freezer full of TV dinners was supposed to make up for the cook. It didn't fly. And the reason it didn't fly was that people said, well, we can't live on a boat without a cook. The cook is, the social center of the boat. You can't discuss baseball scores with the microwave oven. Anyhow, Mohawk is still operating, not on the barge canal or not in New York, but it's operating on the Mississippi now. out of Cahokia, Illinois, near St. Louis. Okay, some more boats that never made it onto the barge canal. This was built at Matin. It was built as Mobile 1. You see with that wheelhouse, could never make it under the first bridge here. This was built by Matin. And in fact, this was the last boat ever built by Matin. And they stopped building boats because not only could it not make it under the bridge in Waterford, it also couldn't make it under the bridge between the Matin shipyard and Troy. Is that the 112th Street Bridge or something? Yeah.
It was originally a 12 bridge.
Yeah, that's right. And that put Matin out of business. But this was Mary Turicamo before it was launched right over here on at Matin Shipyard. In 2018, Canal Corp bought 10 of these. And remember I said something about a boat needing a captain or a captain needing a captain's license? Well, if you build a boat that's shorter than 26 feet, the person at the helm does not need a captain's license. So this is 25.3. It's under the bar. It has much more power, at least on paper, than Urger does, which is a much larger boat. It has, if I remember right, 1,000 horsepower, two 500 horsepower engines. They've got two versions of this boat. One that has a wheelhouse that can be raised, and one that cannot. I took this picture. Oh yeah. Does anybody know where this picture was taken?
Tennessee River.
This is the Genesee crossing, and you can tell that by the Calvert and Vaux bridge in the background. And that brings us to J. Arnold Whitty. And I'm not going to say very much about J. Arnold Whitty because somebody will be talking about this boat this afternoon. But I will say that there's something unusual about this boat that you can't see below the waterline. Anybody want to guess what that might be? What is that? Are you giving me the fingers? Okay, so it has 3 engines and it has 3 props. And the props can be operated as a single prop or as 2 props or as 3 props as needed. And if you have questions about that, save those questions for this afternoon for whoever is going to be talking about the J. Arnold Whitty. Does anybody have any questions for me? If you, yes.
How about the impact of the V in the stern of the barge that started, I think, in the 50s, and of course now I guess they've locked together?
Okay, so the question is about the design of barges. You might think that a barge is a rectangle, but in fact, as that design evolved, there was initially a tiny notch on the stern of the barge, and then as time went on, the notch, that notch is called a notch. That notch got larger and larger, and eventually, rather than using line to connect the tugboat with the barge, there were hydraulic pins that were built into the hull of the tugboat. So when the tugboat entered the notch, it would be locked in place by these pins. Now, I call them pins, but the diameter can be as large as 3 feet. So they're huge barges, huge pins. And in that configuration, there are no longer lines connecting, except safety lines, but no longer lines connecting the tugboat with the barge. And the tugboat will always be at the stern. It can't tug or it can't tow. It's definitely a trend that has happened as barges get larger and larger. A couple years ago, I had good fortune to write a story about a tug and barge on Lake Huron and Lake Superior. And in January, I traveled from Detroit to Duluth on this tugboat. Tugboat was 150 feet long. The barge was 750 feet long and transported 35,000 tons of ore. So you know that song about the Edmund Fitzgerald? How many tons did the Edmund Fitzgerald transport? Like 26,000. This barge transported 36,000 tons of ore. And Lake Superior, think about it. There were no lines connecting the tug and the barge. It was pins. And that's where I saw the pins that were literally 3 feet in diameter. There's a good safety record. Other questions? Yes.
So how does that work out avoiding using licensed cabinets?
So the question is, how does that work out? Having
You got people that are trained.
so who operates these boats? Are they trained? Do they know what they're doing? I suppose the employer would not put somebody in that boat, I mean, for liability reasons, for damage, cost reasons. They wouldn't put somebody in that boat that wouldn't know how to operate it. It's a way of getting around the regulations. I'm sure there are people in this room who can speak to the safety record of that much better than I can. And this is my opinion, an organization like the New York State Canals has a lot of territory that they need to maintain, dredge, maintain the banks, and so on. And fewer employees. I don't know, but possibly the pay scale is not competitive with what people could earn if they were to go down to New York City and work on a boat. I don't know. So it becomes harder and harder to crew these boats. Like Syracuse, the boat that I mentioned earlier, the 1933 boat, it's in perfect operating condition, but my understanding is that it hasn't operated the last couple of years because it can't find a captain.
When you gave up the job as low plant supervisor back on it.
Okay, so now there's an updated part of that story. So if I could put that, so the last captain was promoted to supervisor. Then the boat sat idle for 2 seasons. The supervisor decided she was going to give up her promotion so that the boat could go back into service because she really liked operating the boat.
She had to do it, otherwise she would have lost her license.
Well, there's that. If you have a license and you don't use it, you don't have sea time, then you lose your license. Al?
Typically, these little 26-foot boats are operated around job sites, so they're not actually navigating or piloting anywhere. So typically, it'll be one of the construction crews who's got half a brain. So we get the fires around a bridge, bumping or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. The 25-foot tugboats are not operating 24 hours, 7 days a week in all kinds of weather. As Al said, they're operated at construction sites, and so therefore there's a different demand on the operator. Any other questions? Yes?
Is that 25 feet from the water line?
No, sorry, it's 25 feet length. Yeah. The height of eye on that one, I think, is something like 14 feet, 14, 15 feet, and it's 14 wide. Typically, I mean, think about creature comforts. Typically, when one of these tugs is being operated, there's a porta potty on the barge. I mean, face it. And the crew comes aboard with their lunch pail. Any other questions?
They got a grill right there. Barbecue.
Yeah, that's right. The barbecue on the barge there serves the purpose of the galley.
And a microwave.
Yeah. Other questions? If not, thank you for your attention.